Fewer U.S. troops and no Tomahawks for Germany. The American president is sending a clear message to Europe. The trigger, it seems, was criticism from German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who accused Washington of lacking a strategy in the Iran war. Merz tried to play down the planned troop withdrawal, saying there's nothing new. Others, however, are sounding the alarm, especially without the promised cruise missiles. Experts warn of a dangerous gap in Europe's defenses at a moment it wants and needs to project strength. Once again, the call is growing louder. Europe must become more independent from the United States militarily and economically. But is that realistic? On To The Point, we ask, is the U.S. troop withdrawal a turning point for Europe? Welcome to The Point. I'm Nicole Fröhlich in Berlin, and I'm pleased to introduce today's panel. I'm joined by Rachel Tausenfreund, a foreign policy analyst with the German Council on Foreign Relations. Brendan Bourne is with us. He's with the Bertelsmann Stiftung's Europe program, where he focuses on transatlantic trade and security cooperation. And military and security analyst Gustav Kressel joins us via video link from Vienna. We appreciate you all joining us today. Rachel, I want to start with you. How did we get here? This isn't just about a remark the chancellor made in a school in rural Germany, is it?
No, I mean, the remark was not helpful. Not only did he say the U.S. has no strategy, he used the word humiliated, which is not a word anyone likes to hear, and certainly not a word that Donald Trump likes to hear. Absolutely. So that was not a good choice. But the actual policy or the decision to withdraw 5,000 troops, this was probably something that has been planned. There's been talk a long time since this Trump administration got started that you're going to see a reduction of troops in Europe. 5,000 is in the context of what might be possible, not that high of a number. So I think, yes, this was in the planning, and Trump is just now using this as an excuse or as a kind of opportunity to make it look like a punishment.
Yeah. And I want to look at Trump's reaction here, though. Do you think, Brandon, that Trump's ire, in a way, proves Matt's right?
Well, I mean, I think proves right in what way, may I ask?
That this is an operation without a plan, and that he is, in a way, leaving the U.S. in a position that it doesn't really want to be in Iran.
Well, sure. I mean, I think it's a little bit difficult to square the circle that, you know, the president is, of course, in a difficult position. He's backed himself into a corner with Iran. It's having extreme domestic political consequences as well, leading into the midterms this year. But from a European perspective, you know, it's difficult to, you know, I think from the president's perspective, understand how the Europeans have left the United States out to dry when they were never consulted in the first place before this conflict began.
Mm-hmm. Gustav, for many, many decades, the U.S. has been a partner and a protector for Europe. Are those times now over? Is that a thing of the past?
Well, under Donald Trump, it's certainly a thing of the past. And I think the Greenland episode was the final nail to that coffin. However, that doesn't preclude that any future American president will have a different opinion on Europe and might play a more constructive role. We also have to concede that the U.S. is struggling in a world where its relative power is shrinking, and that regardless of the president and a policy, the China threat will grow, and that basically this development will command a self-sufficiency from the Europeans in terms of security and defense. And now Trump is basically speaking out the hard words and giving a lot of insults to that. But it's a strategic trend that will not be revoked with a new president. It will just be a kinder process and a bit more structured and planned process of shifting burdens to the Europeans as compared to what Trump does. But it's irrevocable.
Brandon, you just published a study on the state of the transatlantic relationship. How bad is it?
Yeah, just this morning. So, you know, the data gives us a relatively clear picture. The actions of this administration over the last 18 months have had a severe negative implication for the reputation of the United States, especially among Europeans. 73% of Europeans say that although the United States and Europe have cooperated for decades, it's time that Europe goes its own way. Clear majorities distrust the United States as a partner. And while 18 months ago, 51% of Europeans, a majority, found the United States to be the most valuable ally of the European Union, that's dropped by 20 percentage points in that time.
Before we keep talking about what that means for Europe, for Ukraine, for the transatlantic friendship, I want to take a closer look at Trump's threats here, because they're about more than just moving troops around. This is very much a discussion about trust, deterrence, and the future of the American security umbrella. Trump already flirted with reducing the number of American army personnel in Germany during his first term, but now he might actually make it happen.
The U.S. airbase at Ramstein is the largest American military installation in Europe and serves as a central hub for U.S. operations in the Middle East. President Trump intends to withdraw 5,000 soldiers from Germany, apparently including some from another base, Vilseck in Bavaria, home to the U.S. Army's largest training area outside the U.S. Of roughly 86,000 U.S. soldiers stationed across Europe, almost 39,000 serve in Germany. Their presence has been a pillar of security in the post-1945 order. The U.S. also appears to be reconsidering its earlier plan to station Tomahawk cruise missiles in Germany this year to bolster defenses against Russia. Trump announced the decision after speaking with Kremlin leader Vladimir Putin. He also appears to be weighing further troop withdrawals from Europe.
Why shouldn't I? Italy has not been of any help to us, and Spain has been horrible.
Trump complained that while the United States had helped Europeans defend Ukraine against Russia, they had not done the same for the U.S. in its war with Iran. Withdrawal instead of deterrence. Trump's invitation to Putin?
That is a question I'd like to extend to Gustav. What does all of this mean for, Germany, for Europe, for NATO, faced with a persistent threat from Russia?
Well, the Second Cavalry Regiment, that's not that big of a deal. But of course, the Tomahawk story is significant in the view that it fits into a line of U.S. contracts that haven't been fulfilled. It's not only Germany not getting its Typhoon launchers and Tomahawks. Estonia doesn't get ammunition for HIMARS. There's a shortage of Patriot missiles. Also, Europeans want to replenish their arsenals. So there is a sense in Europe that first, of course, the Trump administration is unreliable, but also that the defense industrial potential of the US is much more limited than Europeans thought it would be, and that America is not the arsenal of democracy it once was. We have to see that some of the discussions during the Biden administration about supplying certain weapon systems to Ukraine, they were not so much discussed as a sort of the German way, this will be a nuclear escalation if Biden would deliver ATACMS, etc. It was a shortage of missiles and long production times of replacement issue that hindered the Biden administration back then. So again, Europeans have a sense that here the era of relying on the US as the key provider for ammunition and technology has to come to an end anyway.
Rachel, what's the greater impact on, the European security architecture here? We're hearing one word over and over, or a phrase over and over these days, the deterrence gap. How important and how dangerous could that become for Europe?
The deterrence gap is the bigger problem than the 5,000. I mean, as Gustav said, first of all, the Tomahawks and the other weapon systems or munitions that were supposed to be delivered that are not being delivered, this is a kind of, nuts and bolts capability deterrence gap. But you also have the larger deterrence gap, which is the unreliability of this president and this administration in its commitment to European security. So this is a sort of fundamental deterrence gap. That said, I mean, right now, Putin is busy with Ukraine. So Europe has some time, and we don't know what will happen in the next administration, but absolutely deterrence, transatlantic deterrence for European security is weakened right now.
It's weakened, and it's something that is weighing heavily on the relation with, between the U.S. and Europe. What is Donald Trump's message here? I know you can't read his mind, but maybe you can tell us who his audience is.
Well, there's certainly a domestic political audience here as well. Of course, this is something that's been a relatively clear trend since even his first administration, that Europeans are taking advantage of the United States, are not there when we need them. But as Rachel said, this is a major hit to the United States that, I had a conversation with a U.S. official yesterday who said we are shooting ourselves in the foot here. Germany, maybe aside from the Korean Peninsula and Japan, it's the foremost location for U.S. power projection abroad, with a look to Eastern Europe, the Middle East, Africa. And when a decision like this is made, a troop withdrawal is one thing, but when a decision is made in such a punitive, emotional way, this clearly sends a message not only to allies, but adversaries like Russia that U.S. reliability and credibility is in question.
Yeah. Gustav, the Ramstein air base was crucial in the U.S.'s war in Iran. From a military standpoint, how unwise is it to lower the number of troops stationed there? Is it true, as Brendan is suggesting, that the U.S. is shooting itself in the foot here?
Well, they are politically. So these soldiers will not be withdrawn from Ramstein. They're withdrawn from Bavaria, from close to Grafenwörth training ground. And the issue is, Germany is the whole sort of the NATO infrastructure inside Europe. You have a good infrastructure. Ramstein is a big airbase. It has a permanent fuel pipeline connection to the Netherlands. So you can orchestrate very large, high-paced air operations from these air bases. They are important not only for Europe, but also for the Middle East. And as we've seen, Trump, at least he cares for Israel. And if you want to supply that country, you go via Europe. It actually was the same route via Europe that Israel was supplied, for example, during the Yom Kippur War in the past, etc. And that geography doesn't change. The second thing is, of course, that Trump or the US, they have contracts with European countries that allow this infrastructure to be used very freely. And if you want to relocate this infrastructure, you have to renegotiate contracts with new countries to place them and to use them. And what are the terms and conditions the US would have then to use the infrastructure they want to create elsewhere? And I really doubt they would get any better deal than from European countries during the 50s when these contracts were negotiated. So indeed, rattling this architecture is a stupid thing from a US point of view. But one has to say, 5,000 troops, this is a more of a symbolic thing. And the big infrastructure hasn't been touched. Neither Trump has abandoned one base, nor did Germany, for example, try to renegotiate or block the US from using these bases. And there's a kind of underlying understanding that there will be a US president after Trump, and it might be a more reasonable one. And so it's in the mutual interest of both countries that this infrastructure remains in place. Whether, of course, it has strategic value for the Europeans, that will depend on the next president and not this one.
Rachel, Gustav says it's a stupid move. Some members of the Republican Party agree with this. There has been vocal criticism, especially of Donald Trump hinting at the fact that he might withdraw more troops even from Germany. So how's all of this going down with the U.S. security establishment?
So the sort of traditional security establishment are the people who are saying this is shooting us in the foot. We need these assets. They're very strategically relevant for what we want to do in the world, the United States wants to do in the world. But there's absolutely a faction within the MAGA coalition, and frankly, there's also a Democratic version of this thinking as well, which would like to see the U.S. withdraw from this global role that it has. And that would be a really fundamental shift. So not sort of taking 10,000 soldiers away or doing something like, move the base from Germany to Poland, which would cost billions of dollars and be really hard to explain, but genuinely have a much smaller U.S. Army, a much smaller global presence, and invest all that money at home, for example, or lower taxes maybe. So that faction is real. We might see that in a future U.S. president. I'm not sure. I mean, it's possible. But that's then a really big shift, not 5,000 and also not 20,000 soldiers.
Brennan, we haven't talked about one player here, and that is Ukraine. What does, even the discussion of a reduced U.S. presence in Europe mean for a country that is currently fighting a war, a bitter war against Russia?
Well, I think the timing of this withdrawal also being around when Trump had a 90-minute conversation with Putin is certainly not a good look. And that's I don't think that conversation and the decisions that were made, even though they were likely in a Schublade in a file somewhere, German coming out of me. The decision to actually implement that decision was likely connected to Chancellor Merz's statements. So, from a deterrence perspective, this is a bad day for Ukraine. And of course, the president's attention is elsewhere, looking to a conflict over 60 days in with Iran that shows no signs of abating.
All of this goes to show that Washington is not the partner it once was. That Europe needs to start standing on its own 2 feet militarily, economically, and technologically. And frantic efforts to get there are underway, but stepping out of the U.S.'s enormous shadow is easier said than done.
Germany is spending more on defense than it has in decades. In 2025, military spending was nearly 25% higher than in 2024, according to the Peace Research Institute SIPRI. That puts Germany 4th worldwide behind the US, China, and Russia. Europe as a whole is also investing much more, up 14%.
We have to step up our military capabilities to be able to defend and protect ourselves. There is a vast amount of money available for the investment.
But joint armament projects are stalling. The FCAS air combat system even risks collapsing over disputes between Germany and France. Europe also aims for greater economic self-reliance, as President Trump again threatens higher tariffs. In response, Europe is pursuing free trade deals with Latin American countries and, for example, India. How prepared are Europeans for a future without the U.S.?
Rachel, life without the U.S. is still a worst-case scenario, but no longer unthinkable. Are the Europeans on the same page when it comes to their idea of what independence has to look like?
I think they're at the beginning of the same page. They're making some important steps. I don't think there's a total unity about what that looks like or how quickly one should get there. But, it was just mentioned the trade deals. These are really important deals that have been in the works for, many, many years that were politically very controversial in Europe. And it really did take, I think, the pressure of this conflict with the United States to overcome the final hurdles. So Europe is looking for new partners, is looking for new markets, is looking to widen its base of friends in this lonely world without the United States.
Yeah. Let's zoom in on this trade spat, the latest one, because Donald Trump says that the EU is not making good on its part of the deal, one I think he called the greatest deal of all times. Is that really true? Or is he just misunderstanding how the EU and its huge bureaucratic apparatus works?
Well, I think, going back to the Turnberry deal that was, met initially in July of last year, there's been a lot of twists and turns in this trade agreement already. I mean, it's not been so long ago that the administration considered applying tariffs on Europe for not giving the United States the ability to annex Greenland from a fellow NATO member. So there's been a lot of twists and turns here, and if anyone has not been a reliant partner in the context of this trade relationship, it's been the United States. One thing that I would want to mention is this data that we received earlier. It fits in line really well with what Rachel said. That 31% I mentioned, that huge drop, 31% is still a relative majority. So still, 1 in 3 Europeans consider the United States to be the most important ally of the European Union. After everything that Europe has experienced over these last 18 months, majorities still find NATO important, and they want to work with the United States in relation to challenges posed by China. So The relationship is fundamentally changing. It's not dead. It can't afford to be. But it also can't afford to be the same as it once was, where there was this blind reliance on American leadership in the world.
Yeah. Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission, came out in response of what Donald Trump said on Truth Social and said, a deal is a deal. We're honoring our end of it. And we are prepared for any scenario. Is that really the case right now? Is the EU prepared for anything that the U.S. president might throw at them?
They're pretty prepared. So there is this mechanism, the anti-coercion mechanism, that they basically set up at the European level in response to the first Trump term, which would allow for a kind of really aggressive counter tariffs and other measures. Plus, we know that the Commission has prepared lists of kind of politically sensitive goods that they would target for tariffs. So if the EU decided to, and I think they would this time, they could push back pretty forcefully. Plus, let's not forget that actually the Supreme Court also told Trump that the way he's been doing tariffs is not actually legal. So he's domestically facing some challenges also for his kind of favorite tool of tariffs.
Yeah. Gustav, I want to come back to the military aspect, because when it comes to defense in Europe, we have competing industries, we have competing systems. Will, nationalism and fragmentation stand in the way of meaningful advances toward more independence when it comes to defense?
Yes, it already does. We have a quite inefficient procurement market in Europe. The European Commission tries to mitigate that, but of course there's a big resistance on the way towards a common European defense market. But also, we have to say we will see a conceptual shift in Europe. Right now, or until now, European armies basically adopted American standards, American industrial standards, because the prime goal of every NATO army was to fight alongside the US. That is under revision now as fighting like the Americans. US doctrine evolves from the US role as a global power and their projection of power and their ability to fight not only, for example, Russia, but also the People's Republic of China or North Korea or Iran, whoever. Europeans want to deter Russia. That's a much more specific task. And now that the US is not a reliable partner, they rethink that, if the mission is to deter Russia, we'll first conceptualize the mission and then see the tools we actually need to them, and then we need to build the tools ourselves. And that is a very slow process in coming into being. But it will have, over the next years, consequences for the defense industrial cooperation between European enterprises and American ones, as well as for procurement. And I think the biggest shifts are about to come. They're not yet there. Because, to be frank, our procurement systems, they're also quite slow. And sort of procurement is still living in 2023, 2024. And these shifts will be factored in later.
Brandon, is Europe, and specifically the EU, with all this bureaucracy that we just talk about, are they in a position to rise to the occasion?
Well, I think, as Gustav mentioned earlier, the Greenland debacle in many ways, I think, garnered a certain collective European response to the administration. I think that was really a turning point. It worked at that time, that pushback. You have certain interlocutors that, working together, are able to talk the president back in that context. I think that's the key moving forward, that a collective European response is necessary. And the data tells us from this report that there's public backing for greater European self-reliance. This is a must moving forward.
Rachel, if the rift between Europe and the US grows, who stands to gain?
Well, initially, Russia, when it comes to Ukraine and European solidarity, but China is watching all of this chaos that the Trump administration is creating, and standing back and positioning itself as the kind of calm, stable global power, right? In a world where these are the two biggest powers, one of them looks steadier and more reliable than the other at the moment. And this is great for China and bad for the U.S. and bad for the U.S. traditional allies.
Yeah. And Gustav, last question to you. Will Europe be able to seize the opportunity this situation has kind of tossed at them?
Well, they have to. There is no going back to the transatlantic relationship we had in the 1990s. The world has changed. The US politics, the domestic politics, the political culture of the United States or in the United States has fundamentally changed. Trump is a symptom of that. It's, of course, one of the most radical symptoms, but we'll be confronted by these trends in the future. I just hope the US will elect a president who can manage that process more wisely than the current one does.
And that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much to all our panelists for helping us get to the point, and all of you watching. Bye-bye.